Hi, welcome to Come to Think of It, a program where we talk about things that matter. I'm Casey Scott, your host. My guest today is addictions counselor Roget Lockard. We've been having a series of conversations about the nature of addiction, and Roget is back again. Thank you. Welcome, Roget.
Delighted to be back, Casey.
When we concluded our last program, we were talking about step 8 of the steps of recovery from Alcoholics Anonymous, and I want to just read that as introduction here. 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. And we talked a little bit about the becoming willing part, but we didn't really delve into the notion of harm a lot, because I think that's a point of confusion for a lot of people. It's not necessarily just everybody that I feel badly about.
Right, although that's certainly a good starting place.
Maybe a good starting place, yes.
One of the earmarks of sobriety, and it's alluded to, I think, in a section in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, in a segment that is referred in that fellowship to as the promises. And there's one particularly enticing item on that list that I have always found delightful, and many people seem to join me in that. And that is, we will intuitively know how to handle situations that used to baffle us. I think very much the same thing applies as we come to have a more and more straightforward, willing, receptive relationship with that part of ourselves that is called in old-fashioned language our conscience.
Ah, that.
Yes. And, you know, in the bad old days, the conscience was viewed as some kind of a strict nun with a ruler or something like that, and to be avoided as much as possible, and there were some pretty good ways to avoid it. But again, to refer to the construct that we've used for the last few shows of very roughly breaking the steps down into 2 parts, where the first 6 steps are about discovering who we are, and the last 6 steps are about learning how to be faithful to that. This very much evokes the role of conscience, the experience of conscience, and the discovery that receiving the information from conscience is good news, not bad news. I recall early, I don't believe I've mentioned this before, early in my own journey in sobriety, I had a therapy that I was involved in myself with a very fine man down in Pennsylvania. And remarkably, the therapy seemed to be much more effective after I stopped drinking. Can you imagine that? On one of the occasions, I was getting so healthy that I actually showed up early for the session. And I had time to look around his waiting room, and he had a saying framed there. I can't remember verbatim, but the gist of it was, those things are moral that make me feel good about myself. Those things are immoral that make me feel bad about myself. Have we talked about this?
No. No.
And I had
it's an interesting standard to apply.
I had 2 reactions to that. One was, it's true. It's just like, I know that. Now that it says that out loud, I know that, and damn. The second one was damn. This spoils one of my favorite games, which is to pretend that it's really a very complex and challenging question as to what the right thing to do is in a given situation.
Yes.
The truth was, if I hold still and ask myself the question, what is the right thing to do here, 90-something, in the high 90 percentile, I will know the answer. Is this the right thing, or is this? The big question, the quandary that I toil with is, am I going to do it or not? So, and as our relationship with our conscience becomes more and more clarified. I'm thinking of like a radio signal or something that's coming through more and more clearly, and I'm not getting other stations interfering and so forth. We discover that this is not something that gets in the way of our wholeness of being, but rather it emerges out of and contributes to our wholeness of being. And that doesn't mean it's always a stroll in the park.
Yeah.
But it does mean that if we're showing up with consciousness, we realize that it's something to be grateful for.
So that the business of everybody I feel bad about, as you point out, may be a good place to start, but it may also, in the early stage of this process, leave out some people, because I may choose not to feel bad about certain things that I later come to understand as I become more familiar with my conscience.
Well, of course, my own sense is that all of the steps are done to whatever level of readiness we are at a given time. And if we have a lively relationship with sobriety, where meaning, and you know, it's part of the nourishment of our life and the adventure of our life, not merely a state of virtue that doesn't shift, then we're constantly making these discoveries about how to be more faithful to who we really are. And you know, the whole cycle of the 12 steps is revisited in deeper and deeper levels. You were going to say?
Well, no, I'm just reminded that in the early days of Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm aware that it was associated with something called the Oxford Group, which had these principles of perfection. And I think it was, if I can recall, these perfect honesty, perfect purity, perfect unselfishness, and perfect love.
Yep.
And at some point early on, the notion of perfection needed to be abandoned as these principles were developed in Alcoholics Anonymous. So it points very much to what you were saying about more being revealed all the time.
And it's somewhere between difficult and impossible, I think, for us to strive for perfection without that, even with the best of intentions, degenerating into willful exercise. But we don't have to go there right now. But there is that feature of it.
Okay, so moving on to step 9. Made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. I think the whole concept of amends may be a little confusing, misleading. Can you explain that a bit in this context?
We had a chat before the show about the way in which amends and apology tend to become viewed as synonyms, and how misleading that can be. And there are parts of the literature, especially the big book, where they're seeking to make it a straightforward set of instructions, one can walk away with that kind of a confusion. But as I think I mentioned to you before the show, my favorite gimmick with regard to this step is to take the word amends and throw away the first and last letters. And we're left with the word mend. And with that notion, and the way I pose it for myself and recommend to others is, how can I mend the damage in which I have participated? And I use that language of participated so that it doesn't have to be an all or nothing kind of a thing. Because in life, very frequently, we are involved in relationships and affiliations and groups and so forth, where we are all inadvertently colluding to be of harm to one another.
Yes. Yeah.
And so we are not singularly responsible, but we are responsible for our part. And for that part, we are very much better off if we can take responsibility for it and then seek to mend it and think about what might contribute to that mending.
So, in another context, in a previous show, we were talking about healthy shame versus toxic shame, and it maybe a good way to look at that would be to hold on to that healthy shame and let go of the blame, because it's not about fixing anything other than what I have done to create the harm.
You know, healthy shame, it occurs to me just now in my favorite description of hitting bottom, which we talked about, I think about a year ago. And that definition of hitting bottom being, I'm no longer willing to live with the person that I've become. In a sense, it strikes me that is kind of the seminal encounter with healthy shame. That it's not about, there may be plenty of toxic shame in there, I'm a bad person, but there's something inside us that is saying, I am not willing to live with this person that I have become. And that version of I has access to a conscience, to an experience of shame that is illuminating and instructive, not simply demeaning and diminishing.
And this also points back to step 8 in terms of that list is people we have harmed. It's not just people about whom we feel badly. So that's an interesting point, because we've been talking all along about self and our concept of self and self as a project in the addictive phase, and the discovery of self in the first part of the steps. And the step 9 is, in this sense, about self. It's not about other people. I mean, yes, it's about our relationships with others, but it's going back to that sense of shame that we feel and healing that, as well as mending the damage that we've done.
You know, it's a wonderful snake swallowing its own tail that we encounter over and over and over in the fellowship. That core insight that drove Bill W. to reach out to other people and try, very unsuccessfully for 6 months, but try to help them with their sobriety, the discovery that doing that kept him sober, and then actually having eventual success with that with Dr. Bob. But so in the face of it, one can say, and indeed it is something that you will hear around the AA program, this is a very selfish program. And that's true, but the selfishness only works if it's done unselfishly, if that makes any sense.
It's selfish, and it is serving the interest of selflessness.
Right. Or it's serving the interests of whole self, of wholesomeness.
Right.
But it does get confusing, as does life. You will hear people, it can get abused, if you will. It can get abused on behalf of self-indulgence. People will sometimes say about what they view as an effort to do some ninth-step work, to make amends. Well, I apologized, and so just because they didn't accept my apology, that doesn't matter, because I did what I was supposed to do.
Right.
And I did that for me to be sober.
Yeah. Whereas the apology wasn't necessarily the amends that was required.
Well, or it wasn't informed by the kind of authentic ownership of having done the harm. It's like, it's more like record keeping. Yes, okay, I did this, I stole the money. Like, I'm sorry I stole the money, okay? It reminds me of a wonderful quote from a gentleman I know who's been in the program for a long time, and he would tell the story on himself. He said, in my early sobriety, the best I could do with the ninth step was, look, I'm sorry, okay? And you know, I have to say, if that's the best you can do, it's better than nothing.
Better than nothing.
But what happens is, there's that remarkable, again, inversion, where the more comfortably we can reside within ourselves, the more generously we can move outside of ourselves with attention and caring and effort on behalf of other people. And the more that kind of consciousness and orientation informs our amends, the more successful the amends will be. And it becomes this reciprocal healing process that is a gift all the way around.
It reminds me of, we've spoken several times about the word admitting, being not just
Confessing.
Not just confessing, but also inviting in or allowing in.
Right.
So it strikes me that the ultimate, if we're talking about mending something, the ultimate mending beyond putting it back the way it was before I messed it up, to the best of my ability, would be to not do that again in the future. To change my behavior in such a way, to mend my behavior in such a way that I don't repeat that sort of mistake.
It's the, what's the name of the oath that the doctors take? First, don't do no further harm.
Yes, yeah.
You know, stop coming home drunk. Okay, that helps. You know,
that's a good start.
Yeah. There's another piece of this step that deserves our attention, and you may be headed there. The except where to do so.
Oh yes, yes. Would injure them or others.
Yes. That I see as virtually the litmus test of the state of our sobriety.
Yeah, because my alcoholic mind immediately says, "Oh, there's a loophole."
Bingo. Yeah. Oh well, that's going to make them uncomfortable if I tell them that I blah 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 had affairs or
right.
And it's well worth distinguishing between discomfort, or to use the bald word, pain, and injury. Again, in an appropriate thesaurus, and I should know with a name like Roget, we find that pain and injury are not synonyms, nor should they be.
No.
And but yes, that little except where to do so undoubtedly has been a get out of jail free card for many people.
Literally.
Perhaps for a while. But again, the process is incremental. It happens in stages. If we're doing it in the robust way that I recommend, we revisit all of the steps both reflectively and systematically. And we catch ourselves, or we allow other people to catch us. We become available for those leaps of awareness and consciousness and conscience.
Yes. Also, because you and I both enjoy delving into words, it occurs to me that the word others does not include me.
Does not.
So if
Well, but the word is injure.
yes.
We don't want to do injury to anyone.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But yes, that's a nice.
Not that I should injure myself, but
Exactly.
I should not use that as an excuse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move on now to step 10. Continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. That seems pretty straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
Is it?
It is when you're in that state of awareness, and in its most trivial sense, it becomes an empty exercise. But I would say that even as an empty exercise, it's better than nothing. That if one is in any way systematically building into their life an event or an interval of self-examination, even if it's gestural, even if it's, saying an empty prayer, that's carving out a space where real awareness can enter in.
Be admitted.
Yeah.
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 It is, I would say that, to my way of thinking, and you may have some angles on this that I haven't occurred to me, but it is one of the more straightforward of the steps.
You in a previous program called our attention to the second piece of AA literature, the 12 steps and 12 traditions, and in looking through this a bit, I noticed a couple of things. Let's see, on page 90, in talking about step 10, it says, it is a spiritual axiom that every time we are disturbed, no matter what the cause, there's something wrong with us. Which points to a very good reason for continuing to do this inventory. Not just so we can apologize when necessary, but
Right.
it's not just a matter of it's basically continuing that process of discovery that we did in the first 6 steps. And then this other 2 pages later, I found this. It says, we begin to see that all people, including ourselves, are to some extent emotionally ill as well as frequently wrong, and then we approach true tolerance and see what real love for our fellows actually means. It will become more and more evident as we go forward that it is pointless to become angry or to get hurt by people who, like us, are suffering from the pains of growing up. So there is that, I see again that discovery, and then that being faithful to who we discover that we are in those 2 passages.
And somehow, and I'm not sure I can pin down exactly why, but you're bringing that to our attention. That particular last quote, with its wealth of compassion, reminds me of my 21-word characterization of addiction and sobriety. That addiction is about moving from fulfillment of longings to pain, and sobriety is about moving through pain to fulfillment of longings. And finding ourselves in those states of acceptance and compassion prepares us for, it predisposes us for compassion. The compassion predisposes us for fulfillment. Because typically the things that interfere with our ability to achieve fulfillment are, or one of the primary things is an generous attitude toward ourself or the world we live in, or both.
This, the word that comes to mind here is vigilance, because if I'm going to continue to take this inventory, it doesn't do me much good to do that every 6 months or every year or whatever. I need to do it on a moment-to-moment basis. Am I acting in accordance with my conscience at this moment? Is this correct, or is this what I should be doing? I hate correct, but it is a life of vigilance that we're asked to lead here, isn't it?
I don't know if there's a more universal notion in all the religions than the idea of devoting a part of every day to attentiveness, to self-examination, which is fulfilled mechanically or not, depending on the consciousness of the person. But simply to have that as an orientation makes a huge difference. Yeah.
Okay, so then...
Let me mention one thought.
Yes.
These days, tragically, many of the times when there might be organic, natural, fluid opportunities and even incentives to be in that state of mind, our attention is full of screens. By screens, I mean television, computers, cell phones, he said, pointing to his cell
Not
phone.
filters, you mean?
No, not that kind of screens,
Yes.
but the current term screens. We instead of being meditative, we are surrendering our attention in a way that's problematic.
I don't want to get too far from the topic here, but that calls to mind the tremendous amount of rude behavior that takes place online, and that screen removes us from that state of being present in this relationship that we have with another person, to the point where people who would ordinarily be very courteous and generous say the most awful things.
Right.
And that's an interesting point.
Yeah.
So our next step is step 11, and I'm just going to read it because we're out of time, but this will give us something to go with next time. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. And that's plenty to talk about, which we will do next time, Roget. We've run out of time again. Thank you very much for joining me.
My pleasure, Casey.
And thank you for being with us on Come to Think of It. I hope you'll be with us next time. Until then, drive cheerfully. I'm Casey Scott.